All right, I think we'll get started. Thank you everybody for joining our financial aid session. Appreciate you coming out tonight for our evening program and glad you took the time to be here. This session is Financial Aid 101 with Fran McKeown from FAFSA, Pennsylvania, Higher Education Administration.
Assistance Agency.
Assistance Agency.
Yeah.
Fran helps us out with a number of different programs. She helps us every year with this junior program, kind of give parents an overview and some insight on the financial aid process in advance of jumping into it. And then she comes back in the fall to help us with a FAFSA completion night. And that night is usually pretty great. Families come in with their documentation and typically sit at one of our computers in our library and actually work on the FAFSA, and in most cases submit it that night. And we do that early in October, right around the same time that the FAFSA opens up. So it gives parents the advantage to getting that done early in the process. So Fran is our go-to person for all things financial aid. Tonight, as she's presenting, if you have questions, you can do them in a public or private in the chat, and we'll try to address them at the very end. We should have about 5 minutes at the end of the session to answer anything specific that you have going on. And as we get closer to the end, I'll post the links for the remaining session for the last session, and you can have quick access to those if you need it as well.
Thank you.
We will be posting this presentation and Fran's PowerPoint on our website at some point. The live presentation, the recording of the live presentation may take a few days to have our technology team work on it, but the PowerPoint should be posted within the next day or two. So thanks again for coming out. I'm going to pass it over to Fran.
Thanks, Jeannie. So hello, everyone. There's my contact information, as Jeannie said. I'm a higher education access partner for FAFSA. And what I'm going to talk to you tonight about is what is financial aid, what types of aid are available, how you would apply, and what happens once you apply. So the basic, what is financial aid? Financial aid consists of funds provided to student and families to help pay for your post-secondary educational expenses. So there's different types of aid available. We call one type of aid merit scholarships, which is a free form of money that your colleges may have available to students. And usually that's based on something the student has done in high school. For example, they could have a great GPA, good test scores, those types of things, and may be offered that merit type scholarship. There's also need-based grants. So I'm going to talk to you about a form you have to file called the FAFSA, the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. And that will determine if you're eligible for those need-based grants. There's also scholarships, and the merit scholarship, the need-based grants, the regular scholarships, they're all free money. So we always encourage students to try to exhaust all the free money first before taking loans. We then have what's called self-help, and that could either be the student working to help pay for their education, savings, either the student or the parent could have saved money for the student to go to school, or the student or parent are going to take a loan to help them pay for their educational expenses. So just to kind of give you a visual of how the steps to financial aid work, you first want to look for all the free money and exhaust that before you take any loans. You definitely want to find out what your school's specific deadlines are for financial aid, because every school is going to have a different deadline that they want you to file your forms by. You have to fill out the FAFSA, which is the Free Application for Federal Student Aid, and I'll tell you what that is in a minute. And then once the student has his financial aid forms filed and they get accepted to schools that they're applying to, the schools will start sending out financial aid notifications or offers telling them what they'll get as far as money is concerned at their particular school. And then, of course, the student wants to make sure they have the money that they need to attend the school of their choice. So there's different sources that the money comes from. One is the federal government, and they have both grants and loans. And then the state government, which is who I represent, I work for FAFSA, who administers the Pennsylvania state grant. The schools or colleges that the student applies to may have their own sources of financial aid available. And then there's scholarships, and we'll talk about that as well. So the first thing you're going to have to do, since you're a junior or a parent of a junior, you will have to fill out the FAFSA next October 1st. So you can't fill that out yet. You have to wait till the student's a senior. And that's the free application for federal student aid. So all your schools will ask that you complete that. If the student wants to apply for any federal or state aid, they must do the FAFSA. And a lot of schools use the FAFSA to determine if the student's eligible for their types of financial aid. You have to file a FAFSA every year the student's applying. The first year the student applies, the student will also have to fill out what's called a state grant form to be considered for Pennsylvania state grant. Now, sometimes schools will require some additional forms. They may have their own institutional financial aid form, or they may tell a family that they want them to complete the CSS profile form, which is put out by the College Board. So what I would suggest is that you look on the school's websites of the schools that your students are considering and see, is it just the FAFSA or do they have something additional they want the student to complete? So I mentioned that the student has to be aware of deadlines. The FAFSA for the juniors will open next October 1st, and it remains open until June 30th, 2023. The schools are going to have earlier deadlines than that, so you're not going to wait till June 30th, 2023 to do the FAFSA, but that's when it remains open till. So you definitely want to make yourself aware of those deadlines. And as far as the Pennsylvania State Grant, for most students, May 1st, 2022 will be your deadline. I would keep that in the back of my mind. There are some cases you can see at the bottom of the slide where students, first-time students, may have an August 1st, 2022 deadline if they apply to a certain type of school, but that's only for the first-time student. So once they become a renewal student, that deadline is May 1st. So the first thing your student will do next October is create what's called an FSA ID account. So both the student and at least one parent have to create these accounts. They go onto the studentaid.gov website and click on create an account, and they'll supply some information like email address, mobile phone. They'll answer some security questions, supply their social security number, and then they'll create a username and password. And that's going to act as the electronic signature when the family completes the FAFSA. So that's the first step. Once that FSA account is completed, the student would, on the same website, the studentaid.gov website, would start the completion of the FAFSA. So they have to do this every year. As I said, every year they attend, they have to complete the FAFSA. There's something built into the FAFSA process called skip logic. And this is nice because based on the way the family answers certain questions, they may be allowed to skip subsequent questions in the process. So the FAFSA is going to ask for income information, asset information, some demographic information. They'll ask where the student wants the information sent to, what schools they're applying to. Once the student and parents supply all that information, they'll get to this confirmation page after they submit the FAFSA. And that, if you can see up on the top of on the right hand of the slide at the top, the estimated expected family contribution, that's going to be calculated for all students. And that's the number that the school is using to see if the student has financial need. On the left-hand side, on the bottom, you can see that's where the link that you can use to start your state application to apply for Pennsylvania State Grant. And the link next to that, if a parent has more than one student that's applying for financial aid, they can copy the parent's information over to another student. So if the student misses that link, FEA will go out with an email to the student and tell them to go out to the FEA.org website, create an account, and then complete the Pennsylvania State Grant form there. And that only takes a few minutes because we already have all the FAFSA information. So we just need a couple of additional pieces of information. Okay. So what happens after you complete the FAFSA? As I said, that EFC is calculated. The student aid report is sent to all the schools that the student listed on the FAFSA. FEA will receive the information so we can determine your eligibility for state grant. Once your students accept it to all the schools, they'll start getting the financial aid packages or financial aid offers from the schools to tell them what they're eligible for. And that's when they'll compare the aid officers or aid offers between the schools that they've applied to. So what the school does is they look at the cost of attendance at their institution, and they take that expected family contribution and deduct that from the cost of attendance to come up with what the student's financial need is. So just a little bit about how that expected family contribution is calculated. The primary factors that it's based on are, as you can see listed here on the slide, the parent's income and assets, the student's income and assets, the family size, the number in college, and the age of the older parent. So they're the kinds of things they're looking at to determine what that EFC is. So this slide just shows you an example. If a student's applying to a school that says their cost of education is $32,000 and the EFC has been determined to be $5,000, and that EFC is going to be the same no matter what school they attend. So for this particular school, the student's need is $27,000. So that's what the financial aid office is going to use to try to award up to as much of the $27,000 as they can. They can't always meet 100% of need, but they try to do the best they can with the financial aid they have available. So when you file the FAFSA next October 2021, it will be using 2020 tax information. So that information is almost 2 years old. So you might have had something happen where maybe somebody lost a job or there's a reduction in income for some reason. If that happens, you have to contact the schools that the student's applying to and FAFSA to let them know that you have a special circumstance, and they'll ask you to provide documentation, and then they'll determine whether or not to use their professional judgment to use the more recent information. So just keep that in mind if you have something like that happen. So when the school sends that notification out to students, that's your official notification as to what type of financial aid you're going to get, what the amounts will be, what you have to do to accept or reject any type of aid, and they'll disclose students' rights and responsibilities. There's not really any required standard format for financial aid notices, so they could look very different from school to school. So when you get those notifications, just a couple questions you should ask yourself. How much of the financial aid is free money? Because you want to exhaust as much free money as you can before you take loans. And what types of aid are based on need? Because your need could change from year to year. You're filling that FAFSA out every year and your financial situation could be different from one year to the next. You may have 2 in college one year and 1 the next, which would change your financial need. So you want to know what's based on need. If you have any financial aid based on merit, you want to know what the student has to do to keep that merit-based aid. So for example, some schools may say, in order to keep this merit-based aid for the 4 years, you have to keep a certain grade point average. And then you definitely want to know how much loan money you have to take out, both parent and student, and see what you feel comfortable with. So some of the types of aid that are available, the federal programs, the main federal grant is called the Federal Pell Grant. And the maximum for this year is $63.25. So we don't know what it will be for 22-23 yet, but just to give you an idea, it usually goes up each year a little bit. So that's the max for this year. And that's given to the students with the highest financial need. Colleges apply to the federal government for something called campus-based aid. And that could either be in the form of a grant, which is the Federal Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant, or what's called a federal work study program, where a student would be offered a job. They would work a certain amount of hours each week for that job and get paid in a check. And they use that money towards their educational expenses. So they're the 2 types of campus-based aid that colleges would award. And it depends on what the colleges get. They apply for that through the federal government, and then whatever they get, they divvy up among the students. Just keep one thing in mind. If you see federal work study on your award notice, that doesn't come right off the tuition and fees. The student has to earn that money and get paid in a check. Now, as far as Pennsylvania State Grant is concerned, and that's what PHEAA, who I work for, we administer that program on behalf of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. For this year, and I don't know what it will be for the year your students will be starting because it's always based on the state budget. But for this year, if a student was in state attending one of our highest cost institutions in Pennsylvania and they were full-time, the maximum they could have gotten was $45.25. If they were half-time, they would get half of that award. Now, if they were attending an out-of-state school, the only states that that money could go to would be the states you see listed here, either DC, Delaware, Massachusetts, Ohio, Vermont, or West Virginia. If they go to any other state, they can't use the Pennsylvania state grant. And you can see here that the state grant is reduced. So where in-state the maximum was $45.25, out of state the maximum was $578, unless the student was a veteran, and it would be $770. So that's just something to keep in mind if you're considering some out-of-state schools. So if the student's interested in the federal direct loan program, any student can get this loan regardless of what their financial need is. What happens is the financial aid offices look at the student's need, and if they have financial need, they offer them what's called a subsidized loan, which means the federal government will pay the interest on behalf of the student while they're in school and during the 6-month grace period after they graduate. If they don't show financial need, the school offers the student what's called an unsubsidized loan, which means the students are responsible for that interest while in school and during the 6-month grace period. Now, the interest on this loan is set every July 1st. So for 2021, you can see that the interest was or is 2.75%. And the fee that gets taken off the top of the loan for this year is 1.057%. So that'll be different in 22, 23. We're not sure what that will be, but it gets set every July 1st. The student doesn't have to show any kind of collateral or go through any credit check. Just by virtue of them being a student, they can get this loan. They don't have to make any payments while they're attending school and during that 6-month grace period. There's all different kinds of flexible repayment options open for the student. And remember that there's a subsidized loan and an unsubsidized loan. So the amounts a student can borrow, you can see here that for a first-year student, so for a freshman, if they're dependent on their parents, they can get up to $5,500 under this loan program. Now, if they show financial need, up to $3,500 of that can be that subsidized loan where the federal government's paying the interest on behalf of the student, and the difference of the $2,000 would be unsubsidized loan. If the student doesn't show any financial need, the full $5,500 would be unsubsidized. And as you can see, for the second year, the loan goes up $1,000, and third year and beyond, it goes up another $1,000. Now, in that third column where it says independent or dependent students whose parents are unable to borrow a PLUS loan, on the next slide, I'm going to talk about the Parent PLUS loan. But if a parent applies for this loan and gets turned down, the student can borrow an additional $4,000 in their name as an unsubsidized loan. So instead of getting $5,500, they could get $9,500. So the Federal Direct Plus loan is for parents of dependent undergrad students. So it is in the parent's name, but it's for the student's costs. The rates, again, just like the student loan, are set every July 1st. So for this loan for this year, the rates were 5.30%. So as you can see, that's a lot more than the student loan. The fees are more as well. For this year, the fees are 4.228%. Now the parent can borrow up to the cost of attendance minus any financial aid the student has received. And the parent applies each year for this. There is a lenient credit check done, so they're just really looking to make sure that parents don't have adverse credit. But if they get turned down, as I said, that student could apply for the additional $4,000 unsub loan. And the parent can choose to have the principal deferred while the student's in school, but the interest is going to be accruing. And the student has to have filed a FAFSA in order for a parent to apply for this loan. Now, if a student has exhausted all types of financial aid that we just talked about, there are or is something called a private or alternative loan. And they're usually offered through banks or financial institutions. Sometimes credit unions have them. We at FAFSA have a private alternative loan. So these loans are in the student's name, but almost always require a co-signer, which usually winds up being the parent. The student can borrow up to the cost of attendance minus the other financial aid they received. The students that apply for this type of loan go through a full credit check. They're looking at FICO scores, debt to income ratio, all those kinds of things. And the different lenders will have different fees, interest rates, loan amounts. So you want to make sure you read the fine print and see what the different lenders are offering so that you know what you're getting into and what you're signing off on. If you are interested in the Pennsylvania, we call it the PA Forward Loan, our private educational loan, you can go to our website, FEA.org/PA Forward to find out more information. And we do have loans for undergrad students, parent loans. Now, students have to be a Pennsylvania resident attending any Title IV eligible school, which most of the schools in the United States are Title IV eligible, or they can be a resident of one of those states you see listed there attending a PA school. So there's a lot more information on how to apply and things like that on our website. So I mentioned scholarships earlier as another way of finding some free money. Your high school guidance counselors will be aware of some local and regional scholarships. You should be in touch with them. Also, the schools that you'll apply to, the post-secondary schools, may have scholarships. So you want to find out if they do have scholarships, what is the criteria? What are the application deadline dates? Is there an additional application other than just the admissions application? So you want to find out all that information so you're applying for everything possible. And then there's national scholarships you can apply for. And this next slide, it looks like a lot, but we will make this PowerPoint available. On the right-hand side, you'll see all different kinds of websites that you can use to search for these national scholarships. And since you are juniors, this summer would be a good time to go out and try to, look at some of these websites, find out what scholarships you may want to apply for so that you're ready come senior year to apply for the scholarships by the deadline they impose. Just remember that all the scholarships aren't just based on a GPA or a high SAT score. They're all over the place. You could have done community service and there might be a scholarship for that. It might be something might be based on an instrument you played in high school or sport you played. So take a look at those websites to see if there's something you might be interested in applying for. So what you can do now, I have on the slide, apply for an FSA account. I probably wouldn't do that now. I probably would wait till your senior year because you might forget what your username and password is. So that would be the first thing you would do come October of your senior year. But for now, you can be exploring these scholarships as we talked about. You can visit college websites to find out their deadlines and what type of aid they have available. You can go on websites and talk about or look at their net price calculators. Every school has to have one. And what that is, it will say, here's the net price, or I'm sorry, here's the sticker price. You put your information in and then they'll say, this is probably about what you'd have to pay. So that might help you in making your decision. You can go on our website and order free materials. I know Jeannie has some materials that she said she can make available to students if they're hybrid or if they want to pick the materials up. That is my contact information if you want to take that down in case you have any financial aid questions in the future and something you didn't think of tonight. I know Jeannie and I work closely together. If you have a question, she'll email me if she needs help.